Less than 10 years ago, Chile were powerhouses of South American football. They won back-to-back Copa Americas in 2015 and 2016, overcoming Messi's Argentina in the final on both occasions. They took Brazil to penalties on home soil in the quarter-finals of the 2014 World Cup, and even their club sides were immensely competitive, with Universidad de Chile, most famously, lifting the Copa Sudamericana in 2011. At their peak, in early 2016, Chile were ranked third in the world, above the last four FIFA World Cup winners, Germany, Spain, Italy, and Brazil. Fast forward 8 long years, and Chile failed to qualify for either the 2018 or 2022 World Cups. They look unlikely to qualify for the 2026 World Cup, despite an expanded format, currently sat bottom in the CONMEBOL qualification standings, following their worst ever start to a qualifying campaign, and they were knocked out in the group stage of the 2024 Copa América, in the summer having failed to score a single goal. At the time of recording, Chile haven't won a competitive football match in over 12 months, and they've only won one in more than 2.5 years. Since winning their second successive Copa América, Chile have lost games against Tunisia, Honduras, and Venezuela. From third in the world in 2016, La Roja are now ranked 49th in the FIFA World Rankings, the third lowest of any CONMEBOL nation, and below Panama, Qatar, and Slovakia. It is the steepest decline of any men's national team during that time. In November of last year, during an international break in which Chile drew with Paraguay and lost against Ecuador, a problem with the plumbing at Colo-Colo's Estadio Monumental saw Chile's players showered in their own excrement. Both figuratively and literally, therefore, Chile's national team has become a shower of shit. But how did it happen? Not specifically the shower problem, just to be clear, I'm not a plumber. How did Chile go from being a team of superstars, which twice dethroned peak Messi's Argentina, to be crowned as the kings of South American football, to showering in their own feces and losing at home against Bolivia, in less time than it took for China to build more high-speed rail than the rest of the world has combined, or for Manchester United to realise that Anthony Martial probably wasn't going to become a title-winning number 9? Those are two of the greatest feats of human engineering, of course. I'm sure you'd all agree. Well, that's what today's video is all about. So sit back, relax, and join me on a journey from the Andes Mountains to the Pacific Ocean to the southernmost country in the world, which is as long and narrow as Peter Crouch, as we take a closer look at the shocking downfall of Chile's national team and Chilean football as a whole. There is a school of thought which argues that Chile's recent struggles are nothing new. Chile's two-time Copa America winners were a golden generation of epic proportions, and like Denmark, Romania, or Bulgaria's golden generation eras before them, what we are now seeing is simply an inevitable regression to the norm. There is some truth to that claim. Outside of when they hosted the World Cup in 1962, prior to 1998, Chile had never made it out of the group stage, and before their 2010 golden generation, Chile had only qualified for one out of the last 6 World Cups, dating all the way back to 1982, and they literally never won the Copa America. Chile's 2024 Copa America group stage exit is viewed as being symbolic of a catastrophic decline, but they exited at the exact same stage in 2004, which was their last Copa, before the golden generation era began to kick in. It was a freak occurrence that Chile produced players of the caliber of Claudio Bravo, Gary Medel, Arturo Vidal, Alexis Sanchez, and Eduardo Vargas, 2 of whom would be nominated for the Ballon d'Or, who all peaked at pretty much the exact same time. They benefited from excellent management when they were all at their best, and like almost all trophy-winning teams, they had a little bit of good fortune along the way, such as there being 2 Copa Americas squeezed into the 2 years in which they were at their peak due to the Copa America Centenario, and beating Argentina twice on penalties, having drawn 0-0 in both finals within normal time. Even with all of that context, though, regarding Chile's historic standing and the abnormality of their golden generation, their likely failure to qualify for the 2026 World Cup, despite an expanded format, represents a new low. No competitive victories in 12 months is absurd, and the sheer speed of their decline has been something else. In other words, A downfall was always inevitable, but one of this magnitude most certainly was not. That's not to say that it can't be explained though, thankfully. Otherwise this would be a waste of time, wouldn't it? One of the things that made Chile's golden team so special was their incredible aggression, intensity, and relentlessness. It was a strategy implemented by the great Marcelo Bielsa, who managed Chile at the beginning of their new wave of superstars between 2007 and 2011, and it suited them down to the ground. Chile's young firebrands, like Medel, Vidal, and Sanchez, all had terrific stamina and athleticism, making them capable of outrunning and outfighting, physically, almost any opponent. It was enough to take Chile to their first World Cup in 12 years in 2010, where they beat Honduras and Switzerland and only lost narrowly against eventual champion Spain to progress to the knockout stage, losing 3-0 against Brazil in the round of 16. Bielsa resigned in 2011, owing to a new FA president being elected, which we will come on to, and he was replaced by Claudio Borghi. Borghi lasted less than 2 years, losing his job following a run of 5 straight defeats, but the intensity of Bielsa ball was resumed, along with some crucial alterations, by Jorge Sampaoli, who got the job in December 2012. Sampaoli already had an excellent reputation within Chilean football, having guided Universidad de Chile to a Chilean Primera Division and Copa Sudamericana double in 2011, which was the first continental trophy a Chilean club had won since Colo-Colo won the Libertadores in 1991. Under Sampaoli, Chile honed a style of football which was often referred to as swarming. Incredibly entertaining, Chile played with a virtually unrivaled intensity and athleticism, literally swarming the ball, as the name suggests, whenever they lost it. It was a high-risk strategy, invariably opening up gaps if teams could beat their press, but Chile was so effective in their press, and, crucially, so disciplined in falling back into shape when their press failed, that it proved to be a nightmare for teams to play against. It helps, of course, that this style coincided with Chile's best players playing the best football of their careers. By the time of the 2015 Copa América, captain Claudio Bravo was Barcelona's number 1 and had just won a La Liga, Champions League, and Copa del Rey treble. Gary Medel had just enjoyed an excellent debut campaign for Inter Milan. Arturo Vidal had just won his 4th straight Serie A title and reached a Champions League final as a star man at Juventus. And Alexis Sanchez was coming off the back of an awe-inspiring debut campaign at Arsenal, in which he won their Player of the Season award and made the PFA Team of the Year, following 3 seasons at Barcelona. Sampaoli, like Bielsa, stepped down due to disagreements with the incoming president of the ANFP, the governing body which oversees professional football in Chile, in January 2016. And though his successor, Juan Antonio Pizzi, was able to win the Copa América Centenario, making it an extraordinary set of successive triumphs for a national team that had never previously been crowned South American champions, overall, Chile looked a lot less formidable than they had done under Sampaoli, and after failing to qualify for the 2018 World Cup, Pizzi resigned. There would be one last hurrah for Chile's golden team, who beat Japan, Ecuador, and Colombia to make the semi-finals of the 2019 Copa América, where they lost 3-0 against Peru, but failure to qualify for the World Cup in 2018 effectively marked the end of Chile's short-lived but utterly mesmerizing golden generation. The same thing that had made them so successful and so difficult to play against, their high intensity and superhuman athleticism, made their downfall even more rapid, and an aging Chile team so unsuccessful and easy to play against. Where Sampaoli's team of 20-somethings swarmed, Reinaldo Rueda and Martin Lazarte's teams of 30-somethings buzzed about, rarely winning the ball back in areas where they could hurt their opponents, and leaving massive gaps in behind them which they lacked the athleticism to recover from. In some ways, even now, at least 5 years on from Chile's golden generation's final modicum of a last hurrah, this remains a serious problem. Chile's last manager, Eduardo Berizzo, who previously managed the likes of Celta Vigo, Sevilla, and Athletic Bilbao, resigned less than 18 months into a 4-year deal in November 2023, having won just 4 of his 16 games in charge, and having overseen Chile's worst ever start to a World Cup qualifying campaign. He was replaced by the vastly experienced Ricardo Gareca in January 2024, who has an excellent reputation within South American football. Gareca has managed some of the biggest clubs in Argentina and Colombia, but he is best known for his more than 7-year stint in charge of Peru, during which time he transformed the national team's fortunes. Gareca took Peru from 59th in the world when he first arrived, not having qualified for a World Cup since 1982, to the top 10 of the FIFA World Rankings for the first time in their history just 18 months into the job, above England, Italy and Uruguay, their first World Cup in almost 40 years in 2018, and most notably of all, the semi-finals of the 2015 Copa América, where Peru only lost narrowly against eventual winners Chile, and the final of the 2019 Copa América, where Peru beat Chile 3-0 in the semis and only lost in the final against Brazil. Gareca, like a couple of Chile managers of old, plays aggressive, high-intensity and very carefully choreographed football. That became difficult to orchestrate with an aging Peru squad, but with Chile, Gareca has jumped out of the frying pan and into the fire. At this point, it is worth acknowledging that Chile have actually performed better under Gareca. They have looked more organised and harder to break down, they have made strong starts in a couple of games, and they have started winning the ball back further up the pitch again, creating chances, and scoring the odd goal. Most notably, in Gareca's first 2 games in charge, Chile travelled to Europe, where they thrashed Albania 3-0 and went toe-to-toe with France, only losing that game 3-2. In his third game in charge, a Copa América warm-up fixture and friendly, Chile beat Paraguay 3-0. At the tournament itself, however, La Roja went out in the group stage, drawing with Canada and Peru, losing against Argentina, and failing to score a single goal. They haven't won a game since then. Despite the improvements in Chile's performance levels, including a 2-1 defeat against Brazil during the current international break, where they only lost the game in the 89th minute, the problem for Chile is that they lack the athleticism to maintain Gareca's pressing style, tiring in games, becoming more open, and eventually being punished. As much as Chile have lost talent since the height of their golden generation, and they have, the loss of physicality and athleticism has been almost as significant. At their peak, Arturo Vidal and Charles Aranguez could go to battle with the best midfields within international football, and invariably, they would come out on top. Chile dominated games not by dominating possession, but by dominating the physical battle, suffocating their opponents in possession, and quite literally, imposing themselves upon them. Gareca seems to want to do something similar, but his midfielders are of a completely different profile. His difficulties coming up with a solution to that problem have been exhibited in Chile's last 2 games, in which Gareca has named 2 entirely different midfields. Against Bolivia, during the last international break, Flamengo's Eric Pulgar, Club America's Victor Revilla, Midtjylland's Dario Azario, and Colo Colo's Carlos Palacios formed a midfield diamond, whereas in Chile's defeat against Brazil during the current break, Colo Colo's Esteban Pavez partnered Huracan's Rodrigo Echevarria at the base of Chile's midfield, with Club America's Diego Valdez in front of them. Pavez, Echevarria and Valdez are 34, 29 and 30 years old, yet they have won fewer than half as many caps between them as Arturo Vidal has won on his own. That is not to say that Vidal should still be starting, just to be clear. Chile look a much better team without him now, and without Medel, and dare I say it, even Alexis Sanchez at this stage, who is Chile's greatest player of all time. The point is that the new blood in Gareca's midfield are already quite old, they aren't capable of playing with the speed and intensity that he wants, and, put bluntly, they are nowhere near as good as the players who preceded them were at their peak. Chile managers for some time now have received criticism from all angles, both for dropping national team icons and for continuing to select them from opposing quarters. Gareca has been more ruthless than any of his predecessors, albeit he still took a 41-year-old Claudio Bravo and a 35-year-old Alexis Sanchez to the Copa América, but the reality is, the reason successive Chile managers have been slow to replace aging superstars isn't solely through a fear of backlash, but primarily because they didn't feel as though there were many compelling alternatives. We have addressed the tactical, technical, and personnel reasons for Chile's dramatic downfall on the ground, but that raises a much more macro question regarding Chilean football. Why has it stopped producing great or even very good players? On this front, there are a couple of key reasons or theories. One is the wave of privatisation that has taken place in Chilean football over the last 20 years. In many ways, Chile's golden generation were the last generation of Chilean players who were developed in the pre-privatisation era. In 2005, with many Chilean clubs facing economic hardship, a new law was passed which brought about a wave of privatisation which included the country's biggest clubs like Colo-Colo and Universidad de Chile. This led to a short-term influx of cash, but little to none of that cash was actually invested in the long-term future of Chilean football. In actual fact, long-term investments, like infrastructure, facilities, and youth development were neglected, deteriorating as a result of privatisation, because they were considered less important to private investors than they were to the members who previously owned Chilean clubs. Instead, Chile's biggest clubs diverted their resources towards signing older and more established players with relatively high wage demands, most of whom were, and still are, from Argentina, and most of whom, to be honest, haven't been particularly impressive. This constitutes a two-pronged assault on Chilean youth development. Firstly, it is being neglected at source, through fewer resources and interest being invested in it, and secondly, youth team players who somehow manage to still navigate the system are being overlooked when previously they would have been given first-team opportunities, and therefore the opportunity to develop, in favour of those ageing and often very underwhelming foreign players who have done little to improve the standard of Chilean football. In this sense, as in so many others, there are parallels between the plight of both Chilean and Mexican football, the latter of which I covered in a documentary about a year ago. It's not true to say that there aren't any talented Mexican or Chilean academy prospects, despite all of the obstacles. The real problem is that the obstacles don't stop there. Opportunities are few and far between, meaning academy graduates who turn professional sometimes don't make their senior debuts until they're 21 or even 22 years old, in sharp contrast to talented youngsters in Argentina, Uruguay, or Brazil, who tend to develop much better as a result, and those who are thrown in at 17, 18, or 19 have become so abnormal that they are built up beyond any and all reasonable expectations, which can often go to their heads, either in terms of the pressure becoming insurmountable and overwhelming, or their egos exploding and their work rate deteriorating, or some combination of the two. It feels as though, whenever a Chilean registers their senior debut for a big club before turning 20, there are immediate calls for them to be called up to the national team. It is indicative of a level of desperation, but it's also unhealthy in terms of their personal development. As is the case in Mexico though, albeit to a lesser extent, there is money in Chilean football. Quite often more money than young players can earn abroad, which means that, even if they're not playing, many of them stick around to pick up a healthy paycheck, rather than pushing for moves and maybe taking a short-term financial hit to benefit their own development long-term. This is a particular problem in Liga MX, where teams pay some pretty mediocre players far more than they could earn in either Europe, Argentina, or Brazil, but Chilean agents, who are among the most unscrupulous anywhere in the world, and we are talking about football agents here, so that is saying something, often look to get their clients' moves to Mexico as a result. Victor Avila, for example, who won La Alqueria tournament with Chile's under-20 team in 2015, joined Liga MX side Necaxa from Huachipato when he was only 19 years old, and is back playing in Mexico now, following a season in Russia. Age 26, Davila has only won 16 caps for Chile in total, and is one of 7 Chileans currently competing in Liga MX. He's not the only promising young Chilean to fall by the wayside. Going back further, Manchester United signed Angelo Enriquez for €4 million after he scored 11 goals in 17 games for Universidad de Chile as a 17-year-old, but he never registered a first-team appearance at Old Trafford. Now aged 30, Enriquez has won just 14 caps for Chile, only scoring 2 goals, and currently plays his club football for Lamia in the Greek Super League. Elsewhere, Mateus Gutierrez became Chile's youngest debutant since Alexis Sanchez at the age of 17 in 2011, but 13 years on, that is still his only senior appearance for the national team. Yerko Leiva made his international debut at 18 in 2017, while starring for Universidad de Chile, but was one of those to make an early but unproductive move to Liga MX, also to Necaxa incidentally, and has never added to that solitary cap, now aged 26, and 20-year-old Yuri Thompson, who looked to be one of Chile's brightest prospects in a very long time, was suspended last year after a video of him committing domestic violence on his then-girlfriend at a nightclub was released to the public. He was reinstated by Colo Colo, because this is football that we're talking about, where violence against women is as normalised as violence against animals in a slaughterhouse, but literally the following day, yet more videos of Thompson committing domestic abuse were released online. Charged with attempted femicide, that is, attempting to kill his ex-girlfriend, and criminal contempt, with his trial still pending, Thompson moved to Russia in January 2024, joining FC Orenburg, a Russian Premier League side owned by Russia's majority state-owned energy conglomerate, Gazprom. He hasn't, and hopefully never will, win a senior cap for Chile as a result. There are many such examples, not necessarily involving players charged with attempted murder, but who have failed to live up to their potential for a range of both systemic and individual reasons. There were plenty of problems with Chilean football before privatisation. It would be stupid to pretend otherwise, but it would be equally stupid to pretend that privatisation hasn't actually made most of those problems, whether that be corruption or financial crises, even worse. Argentina's recently elected president, Javier Milei, by the way, having observed the extraordinary success story that is privatised football in Chile, has attempted to privatise football in Argentina, where the current system, which has heralded a World Cup and successive Copa Americas in the last 3 years, clearly isn't working. His reforms were blocked by a court in Buenos Aires last month, but it would be funny if, out of everything, ruining Argentinian football was what brought him down. The latest economic crisis to hit Chilean football came in 2023, when Chile's Supreme Court outlawed offshore sports betting and gambling firms, who were the largest sectoral sponsors of Chilean football. That was neither a healthy nor a sustainable long-term arrangement, but the ban resulted in an instant funding crisis and a metaphorical rug being pulled from underneath Chilean football's feet, from which the sport is still reeling. Chile is the most developed country in Latin America according to the Human Development Index, as well as having the highest GDP per capita in the region, but sport as a whole, not just football, has long been incredibly corrupt and poorly managed. Chile have only ever won 15 medals at the Summer Olympics, which is fewer than Latvia and the Bahamas, and 4 times fewer than North Korea. New Zealand, a country of just 5 million people, compared to almost 20 million in Chile, won more than that at the 2024 Games alone. Chile are one of the few countries to have been banned from competing in a FIFA World Cup, the 1994 World Cup to be specific, after goalkeeper Roberto Rojas feigned a head injury to get a 1990 World Cup qualifier against Brazil abandoned. Rojas pretended to have been struck by a firework from the crowd, but had in fact cut his own face with a razor blade concealed in his glove. Rojas was banned from football for life, in what was described as one of football's most shameful sagas. Meanwhile, Chile were banned from competing in qualifying for the next World Cup. That is the scandal involving Chilean football, which is probably best known to an international audience, but domestically, scandal, chaos and corruption are the norm. Earlier I mentioned Marcelo Bielsa's resignation owing to a change of ANFP and AFCHA presidents in 2011. The ANFP is the National Professional Football Association, which is the governing body for all professional football in Chile. Meanwhile, the AFCHA is the Chilean Football Federation, which is the governing body which oversees all football in Chile. Harold May Nichols, a former sports journalist, became president of both organisations in 2007, and it was he who appointed Bielsa, who in turn oversaw Chile's qualification for the 2010 World Cup. Bielsa was supposed to stay on with the national team until 2015, but in 2010, he stated that he would resign if Jorge Segovia won the presidential election ahead of Maine Nichols. Segovia proceeded to win the election, and Bielsa followed through with his threat. Maine Nichols successfully challenged the election process, meaning that Segovia never actually became president, with Sergio Haraway subsequently elected in the follow-up elections in 2011. Maine Nichols, who was a prominent critic of FIFA's decision to award the 2018 and 2022 World Cups to Russia and Qatar, was later banned for 7 years by the FIFA Ethics Committee, though they didn't provide any explanation as to the decision at the time. FIFA later claimed that Maine Nichols had sought family favours and, I quote, ignored his responsibility as a high-ranking FIFA official, someone who was expected to act with the utmost neutrality and integrity in order to pursue his own personal interests. End quote. Maine Nichols successfully appealed his ban through the Court of Arbitration for Sport in 2017. His successor, Sergio Haraway, was forced to resign during FIFA's 2015 corruption case, accused of taking bribes which exceeded $1.5 million. He entered into a plea deal with the FBI, and he was subsequently issued with a lifetime ban from all football-related activities. This was the president, it should be noted, who was in charge of Chile's golden generation at their very zenith, and who appointed Jorge Sampaoli, who won Chile the 2015 Copa América. There was plenty of corruption, financial trouble, and other problems in Chilean football before privatisation, just as there was within the ANFP under Haraway. But as one Chilean effectively put it, Chilean football has gone from being run by corrupt shysters who were passionate and cared about football, to corrupt shysters who don't care about football. It is a subtle yet significant difference, and it shows. Chilean football as a whole, not just the national team, is a mess right now. The showers at Colo-Colo, the country's biggest club, showering the national team in feces, isn't just an amusing metaphor for the current state of the Chilean game, it is indicative of how facilities have been neglected over the last 2 decades even at the highest level. Chilean clubs have never been routine winners or even finalists in South America's continental competitions, but a bit like Turkish clubs in the Champions League, they were always a nightmare to play against. Even for the continent's biggest clubs, they were difficult to break down, and they would go on occasional runs deep in the Libertadores and Sudamericana. Nowadays, also like Turkish clubs, they are a light touch, almost no one fears them, and the only runs that they have are the ones that come straight back up through their showers. It is a sad state of affairs for Chilean football fans, which, combined with often dangerous or just downright unwelcoming stadiums, due to thuggish fans not being dealt with, and infrastructure upgrades not having been implemented, and globalisation and a more affluent population who are able to access a much higher quality of football, which is less dogged by corruption, online and on their televisions, is at risk of creating a whole generation who are either more interested in football outside of Chile than within it, or are simply less interested in football in general. Of course, making Chilean football less appealing means lower attendances, lower viewing figures, and therefore less revenue, creating a vicious cycle which no one seems to have any willingness or genuine suggestions to address. The average attendance in the Chilean Primera Division in 2023, itself massively inflated by Colo-Colo, was under 7,000. So, what next? Chilean football is in crisis. It has fallen behind Ecuadorian, Paraguayan, and, on the international stage at least, even Venezuelan football. From such a recent high point, in which Chile ruled South America, that seemed unthinkable. But it doesn't have to be existential. One of the problems with privatisation in general is that it takes great political will for it to be overturned, and it can be both legally and economically challenging. The funding crisis at clubs in Chile presents that opportunity, but leftist president Gabriel Boric, a Universidad Católica fan who was elected in 2022, has expressed little will in instigating major reforms in football, outside of calling for a clampdown on violence and hooliganism within stadiums. That is an important issue, no doubt, but it alone is not going to be decisive in transforming the fortunes of Chilean football. Corruption is a cancer which can be masked when the stars align and a freak generation emerges all at once and has outstanding leadership. But under normal circumstances, its perniciousness is revealed. Chilean football is currently hideously corrupt, dreadfully mismanaged, and it is now owned by people who don't remotely have its best interests at heart. There are green shoots of optimism. Dario Osorio, a talented winger who has escaped the madhouse and is now playing for Midtjylland in Denmark, who have an excellent track record when it comes to developing young players, and 19-year-old forward Damian Pizarro, who recently joined Udinese in Serie A, are just two examples. But for Chilean football to undergo a major renaissance, ideally, all three of those structural and systemic problems need to be addressed. That is probably pie in the sky, unfortunately. It shouldn't be, but it is. Even when Chile were at their extraordinary peak, they only had 2 out of 3, which, in the words of Meatloaf, ain't bad. Right now, however, the idea of fixing just one of them seems almost hopelessly idealistic. So long as that remains the case, it doesn't really matter what system Ricardo Gareca plays, how high he presses up the pitch, or which youngster he throws in at the deep end as a long-term replacement for Eduardo Vargas. Chilean football will remain deep in the doldrums. That is it for today's video, but thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it or found it remotely informative. I hope that was the case, obviously. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Interested to hear them, especially if you're Chilean, but, also if you're not. And it goes without saying, doesn't it? Make sure that you're subscribed and have notifications turned on not just for this channel, HITC Sevens, but also my second channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be just appearing on your screen now, along with a couple of videos that you might enjoy watching after this one, including, if I remember right, the Mexico one that I alluded to earlier. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads via the username @HITC Sevens on all three, should you wish to do so. And all of those links, plus a whole lot more, should be down in the video description below. Cheers.